There we go. Okay, folks, I'm Betsy Hodge. I'm the Cooperative Extension Livestock Specialist in St. Lawrence County, New York. We're in the very northern part of New York, up above the Adirondack Mountains and sort of straight across from Burlington, Vermont, and not too far from Ottawa, the capital of Canada. And it's great to see all the different people on tonight. It is February 1st, 2021. And so we're recording this from my living room because this is the pandemic. And also I like to give the date so we know later what time we're doing this. And tomorrow's Groundhog Day, but I can pretty much guarantee we're going to have 6 more weeks of winter no matter what happens with the old groundhog. That's if he can dig himself out of the snow tonight. So this meeting came about because I've had several people calling me asking about using wool for insulation and also other uses. What could they do with their wool besides spinning and knitting and making clothing and that sort of thing, or sending it away to make blankets. A lot of us have more commercial meat style sheep. They don't necessarily have the kind of wool you'd want to knit and wear a sweater made from. And so I started looking around and found the Vermont Wool Project going on over in Vermont. And I got a hold of Kim Hagen, who's our guest tonight, and she really nicely agreed to speak with us. So I'm going to introduce Kim and let her talk about their project. And then I'm going to try to, excuse me, monitor the chat so that if you have questions, we're going to try to take those in the chat box for now. And maybe at the end, we can open it up a little more for discussion. So I just ask you to keep your mute button on until after we're done. And also your video off, just so it helps everybody's broadband situation, because not everybody's on a great setup these days. So Kim is the grazing specialist. She used to be a shepherd. She's done a lot of research into different things to do with wool. And I'm going to let her give you a little background on what they're working on and what they're thinking of. So take it away, Kim.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good evening. And for those of you who are enjoying a snowstorm, I hope you're in a warm place. It hasn't hit me yet, but I'm expecting it later this evening. So let's talk about wool. Let's see here.
I think I made you co-host, so you should be able to share. There you go.
Is it up?
It's there, yes.
Okay, great. So as Betsy said, I've been a shepherd myself. I raised sheep for over 30 years, and like everyone, constantly looking for ways to utilize all that wool. I've done all different projects, from having it made into yarn to blankets to rugs, you name it, I've done it. But in more recent times, what I've seen is that, we've all been facing this problem of having all this wool and too much and not knowing what to do with it. And a lot of the farms that I would go to visit with my work with the extension saw that a lot of people had bags of it, either in their barns or thrown out in the backwoods. And people are always saying, what do we do with this? And let's see if I can get my, oops, all right, here we go. Okay. So this was the question that keeps coming up, given the problem of this shorn wool, and it's viewed as an expense, yet it has these numerous benefits and all these attributes, really great attributes, I think. So how do we turn it into an income generating product for all of our sheep farmers?
So why don't we talk about the attributes for just a minute, right? It doesn't burn.
Doesn't burn. It can absorb up to 27, some say, % of its own weight with moisture. Which is one of the things that was attractive for, insulation products, because it could absorb moisture and then it can release it, hygroscopic property. So that's another one.
strong.
It's strong, and it's warm. It breathes at the same time. I mean, more and more clothing companies, thankfully, are turning back to it after, doing plastic for so long. And we found that it's not such a great product. Even though, reusing and recycling some of the plastic in our environment, it's great, but still it's, when you're doing heavy sports or something like that, you need something a little more breathable than the plastic is.
And it's natural.
And it's natural, and it's a renewable resource.
And it keeps the sheep warm too.
Yeah. So after years of trying to work on this in on my volunteer time and as a farmer, I finally decided, okay, I'm going to get serious about this. And I applied for a USDA planning grant, and we got one. And that was back in I think I wrote it in 2016. We actually got the grant in 2017 and 2018. And there's the link to it if you want to read it. Basically, what we did was we went around and interviewed the whole supply chain, from farmers up to people who were making any kind of a finished product, and decided that one of the things that we needed to do was get all these people in a room together. So we did a survey to as many people as we could find on a mailing list, and collected that survey, and a lot of the results of that survey are in that report. But we also went through this process, which is called a design thinking. And we brought in a professional to lead us on a day-long sort of journey, I would say, with this group of people to take a look at this whole supply chain and do some brainstorming, like what could we do with this incredible fiber that has all these great properties? What can we do with it, and figure out a way to generate a revenue source and income for farmers? And in summary, what we found, I had gone into this because I've had this long held dream of making it into insulation and make it, a choice in the industry and get away from some of the more toxic things we do have in our toolbox for insulation. And that's where I started from. That was the premise I was going in on. And while it does have a lot of promise, and I did actually go out and visit with Havelock Wool out in the West, and saw their setup and saw the product they were making, and it's beautiful. And as you can imagine, it is more expensive, but there's a lot of wonderful qualities about that wool insulation. So anyway, in the process of this design thinking and this room of people that we worked through this process over the course of this day, here's what we found. We found that really any of the products that we were coming up with that required some processing, all of them needed, as a very first step, the washing and scouring. That's the bottleneck. That is the crux of the issue. So that process has changed little in 500 years, and these days is pretty expensive process, and fewer places do it. And I was lucky enough to get a chance to visit several processing plants in France several years ago to see how they were doing it. And then they had a conference a few years after that. I wasn't able to attend it, but I did get the proceedings from it. Europe is having the same issue of, and they're ahead of us. They're doing quite a bit more than we are, but they are looking at how can we scour the wool? How can we clean the wool and so that it can be made into other products and not foul our water? I mean, that's really the problem. The water regulations are becoming stricter and stricter everywhere. So,
could you just explain why the water is a problem? Mention the lanolin, and tell them about the pools, the drying pools. I thought that was a very clever solution.
Sure. So the problem with with washing wool, the scouring process is that wool is unusual and because of the lanolin, and the lanolin stays in, emulsifies. So I had experimented myself at home with washing wool, and then I would take the pots of wash water and put it out in sub-zero weather, and the grease does not separate out. It just does not. And a lot of people have tried to figure out ways to do this. And really the way it's done right now is, for the most part, you know, they use chemicals to break apart the globules, the fat globules, and then they use other ones to then recollect that fat, that lanolin, and then dispose of the wash water separately. But it's an expensive process. And then you've got to get that wastewater up to a standard before it's released into the environment. So one of the places I saw in France was really interesting. He had built these big shallow pools. They were about 2 feet deep, like a wading pool, a child's wading pool, but they were large, like a swimming pool size. And he would empty all the wash water into these, and they had a roof over them, but they were open. And he would just let them evaporate over time. And then all the stuff that was left at the bottom, he would then shovel that out and put it back on the agricultural fields. They would just put it right back in the fields. So that was a really interesting and, you know, very sort of passive. It wasn't, you know, he wasn't adding anything to the water to change anything. And it was considered, you know, organic. In that particular situation. Another one that was quite interesting is the Swiss were looking at more electronic pulses and seeing if they could get the fat and the dirt to release from the wool fiber. And they were having some pretty interesting success with it, but it was going to be very expensive. So I'm not quite sure where that one is right now. But there are a lot of people working on it over there. Wool is used in a lot more products in Europe than it is here. And I'll show you some pictures later. But what we came up with our team that worked on this was that what we really need to do is think about something that could be made with raw wool, that we didn't have to scour it. So the top of that list by far, hands down, was garden and agricultural uses. So we pointed ourselves in that direction, and I was visiting my daughter in Europe. She lives in Germany, and we were doing some gardening, and we went to the gardening store, and I discovered these wool pellets that they use, and they sell you know, with the gardening soil as a fertilizer. So I bought a few packets and brought them home. And then they also, you'll see in this slide, they make these wool felts to put around trees or plants, a lot of gardening products. And then they also make a lot of products for the home, but that's scoured wool. Anyway, I did a little more research, and I found out that it was an agricultural college there in Berlin that had developed this product, and they had tried it out with poinsettias and kohlrabis and lettuce, I believe. And they found that, you know, they had some really interesting results. It's not hugely dramatic, but it was enough that it was like, hey, this is good stuff. So I came home and I was thinking, well, you know, we can do this too. We certainly have enough wool that's not used. So I found Wild Valley Farms out in Utah, Albert Wild, and his family has a ranch, and they were also trying to figure out ways to use some of their wool. So I contacted him. He had also discovered the German product, which does have a patent on it. So I called him up and we talked about it, and he came to visit us in Vermont 2 summers ago and spent a week here. And we did a lot of experimenting. We found an old pelletizer out in the shed at the university here from trials they did on switchgrass for fuel pellets. And we played around with that for a few days and we made a decent pellet. It took a really long time though. It took a really long time. But we did some, he also brought some of his pellets and then we ordered a whole pallet from him and we did a couple trials here in Vermont. And here are trials. Those, you can see the pellets in the lower left-hand corner. And then the trial at the research farm at the university, the row of broccoli on the right is with the pellets and the one right next to it is without the pellets. And then the other farm that did the trial, the two rows were pretty similar. They're about the same. So soil type does have an impact. So we decided that we wanted to learn some more. We wanted to really find out what is really going on. So I had some more analysis done of the pellets and we found that they have anywhere from 9 to 13% nitrogen, a little bit of potassium, and then a negligible amount of phosphorus, which was really interesting and very helpful. A lot of the vegetable farmers in Vermont are at their maximum allowable for phosphorus. So they're pretty anxious to find a fertilizer that does not have phosphorus, but they still need the nitrogen. So we wrote another grant and I have one for this coming summer. We're going to do some more trials and this time we've got soil scientists involved and we'll be doing some deeper level research on finding out if this can actually work in those places where the phosphorus is too high and will it help pull that level of phosphorus down. We also need to know like how often would you need to use these pellets. They might be a more expensive fertilizer, but if you only need to put it on every other year because of their, I think they're pretty slow release. But we are going to try it on a couple different vegetables that have would like a fast release of nitrogen and then ones that, need it over the course of the summer. So those are some of the things we're going to look at this summer. And then finally, the last thing is we want to know the economics of it. We're going to take a look at, realistically, what would it cost to actually make a pellet here in the Northeast. So that's where it's at right now. And I'm happy to answer questions or however you want to do this, Betsy.
Yeah, we had one question about what is the R value of wool compared to other typical home insulation?
Oh, I should have put a slide in on that. So it's actually a little bit better than the fiberglass. Fiberglass was, if I can remember right, it was 3.2 and then wool is 3.8 to 4. Something like that.
Mm-hmm. And this morning you told me about visiting the wool insulation place out west. And that was really interesting. Could you describe visiting there and what you found out?
Yeah, sure. So Havelock Wool they're the only ones I know of here in the United States making a wool insulation product. I had worked with some people a few years ago that were building tiny houses and they had tried another product that we ordered it and I do have pictures if anybody wants to see it. It was when we ordered, the owner of the tiny house really was insistent that they really wanted to do this and they were willing to pay for it. So we bought a couple boxes of it and basically it looked like when it came, it was the floor sweepings of maybe a wool processing mill. It was clean, but it was all different colors of bits of wool. And it worked with the little centrifuge machine that we had, and they blew it into the walls, between the studs. They put a membrane over that and blew it into the wall. But we could never get much information from, and it was we weren't quite sure where it was coming from. So I moved on and I made contact with the Havelock wool people, and they were great. So I was at a conference in Nevada 2 years ago, and they invited me to come see their setup. They had just moved into a new place. It was a big warehouse in Reno, and it's really quite wonderful. They're making a really couple products. They do a blow-in and also bats, so either one. But what they do is they buy New Zealand wool. They don't use domestic wool. They've not had good luck with getting wool that was free of barbed wire fences and beer cans, and which can destroy very expensive machinery really quickly. So they've said, until that sort of gets figured out and American domestic growers can take a little bit better care, they have to rely on using the New Zealand wool for now. It comes in these bales that it's already washed and cleaned and compacted, and they buy it in large quantities and then bring it to their place, and then they pull these bales apart and make it into the products that they're making.
That's they have to get our sheep to stop drinking beer, apparently. But yeah, that's sort of sad, but I totally understand why they do it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, if you had a piece of machinery that was, $100,000 and a barbed wire fence went through it and destroyed it.
Yeah. We do have a couple questions here. One fellow asked, how does non-polar lanolin affect soil hydrologic properties? Which I guess is probably why you have a soil scientist working with you on the next project.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a really good question. It's one of the ones I have too. Like how is this going to affect the soil or, impact the soil? We just don't know. No one's, all the people that have done, research on this, no one's done the soil piece.
So we've got another question. Could we make our own pellets? I don't know if they mean their own specific farm by farm or our own pellets in the Northeast, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, that's what our goal is. Yes. You would, and because it would require such vast amounts, I mean, we really need large amounts. So I would say that it needs the whole Northeast to be in on it. And yes, that's the goal. That's our hope, is that we could make our own here in the Northeast.
Well, and you mentioned that you were going to get together and do like a business plan. Like, any idea what one of those pelleters cost, industrial type?
I don't know. I do know we were in talks for a little while with a company in in southern Vermont that makes a wood pellet, and for a little while they were very interested in working with us, so they had something to do in the off season when they weren't making wood pellets. And but then his business really took off, and he just doesn't have the capacity to deal with making wool pellets. So that conversation ended, unfortunately.
Be interesting to know what one of those machines cost.
I know. I imagine.
Somebody else, go ahead.
Yeah.
Somebody else asked, so how are they scouring all that wool in New Zealand?
Well, that's the question. Betsy and I were talking about that today. I'm really curious. I would like to know myself, that they have figured something out, but I haven't been able to find out. And right now there's no way to get there. But we will be I will make attempts again. And I did try with us, the Australians have do a fair amount of scouring too. So I was going to make an attempt to once again see if we could have conversation to find out how they do it.
Yeah, it seems like there must be somebody over there that could tell us if we get connections.
Yep, seems like it. But the New Zealand government has always been very involved with their agricultural scene there. So.
And very supportive.
Very supportive, yeah. I mean, I can remember traveling to far corners of wherever, and you would always see New Zealand lamb in freezers in stores.
Everywhere. Yes, they're very,
Everywhere.
I think maybe because they're on a small island, at least the farmer that I know there that we had dinner with and stayed at their farm for like a week. He's like, we have no choice. We do everything global. We talk about marketing to China. We talk about marketing to Australia. We talk about marketing to the US, talk about marketing to Europe because there isn't that much of New Zealand to market to. And so they've always had a more global view of marketing.
Well, that's probably smart.
Yep. So with their
Yeah.
dairy products, everything.
Mm-hmm.
But Brian here pointing out that, you know, if we don't know how it's going to affect the soil, we don't want to go ahead without, and we don't know what the unintended consequences might be. So it's a good thing you're doing that study this summer to see more what. It's hard to guess what the long-term effects will be like. We know wool breaks down very slowly. Is that going to be
Right.
a good thing or a bad thing for the soil?
Right. And I think the fact that it is, quite a bit of nitrogen, it's protein, so, how much do we need? Number one. So, but if we're gonna, what I'm hoping to do also is sort of compare it with the leading fertilizers that people rely on now, which most of them are imported, especially if you're trying to do organic certification and meet the qualifications for that. If you have to import,
Was it peanut hulls or something you mentioned?
it's peanut meal is like
Peanut
one
meal.
of the number one. So it obviously does not grow in the Northeast. So it's an imported fertilizer. So it's interesting to think about, if using, a local product versus something that has to be brought in.
So we have another question. How clean and dry must the wool be to make pellets?
We found that that didn't really make so much difference, but what was kind of interesting is that we had better luck. It would make a better, not a better pellet, but it held its integrity better, stayed compacted when it was from the dark sheep rather than the white wool.
I would guess they are maybe even greasier.
That's all we could come up with.
Because most of them are wool breed.
Yep. So that's it's an interesting question. And also looking at the difference of, the greasier types versus, the drier types of wool, how much that impacts it as well.
Right, or how much dirt is in there, or I guess
right.
That depends a lot. And somebody asking, can raw wool be felted for hanging basket liners? It certainly could be.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah,
I mean, you could make some by hand, I suppose, and sell them to your neighbors or whatever, or use them yourself.
Yeah, I love it. My plants love it.
Well, we talked about this afternoon. We talked about the problem with making. We wanted to make like mulch, like instead of using black plastic, have a thin sheet of wool mulch. But because you can't really comb dirty wool because of the lanolin and the other things in it, it just kind of goops up. We got to think of another way to comb the fibers all in the same direction,
right?
Without having to actually comb it. There's got to be a way.
Yeah. But I would just love to see us, if we could cut in half the amount of black plastic we're now using in our environment in agriculture, it would be a win-win, I think. I just see all these fields of people just using just a tremendous amount of black plastic, and it breaks down and that gets in the soil. How much worse could wool be than
right.
So, and as you and I have both found, it really does help with weed suppression. I mean, it's really quite wonderful.
Right, and holds moisture in. It works pretty good.
Yeah.
I've put raw wool down around my plants before, but you have to pick it up before you rototill because it doesn't break down and it winds all around your rototiller.
Yep.
So that's why it'd be nice to have the mulch, and you could, like we talked about earlier, we could probably fold it up and save it and use it next year.
Right. And then the pellets, I think, would break down, quick enough. being chopped up wool like that, I think it would break down faster. So
Maybe.
yeah, this summer will teach us a lot about this. I'm kind of surprised that there hasn't been, anybody really looking at the soil part of this before. I mean, they've done these tests with different plants and in different pots, and then we did it actually out in the field trials, but no one's really looked at the soil, what happens there.
Yeah, there's a couple more questions here on scouring. I don't know if we'll know the answer to these or not, but it said, you mentioned that in France they used pools, and after the water was gone, they used the waste on agricultural land. What was the benefit to agriculture?
Well, it was all the, if you think about it, from the wash water, all the solids that precipitate out, it's, old manure and dirt and anything that's accumulated, chaff, all that just, is sinks to the bottom. The water evaporates, and that's sort of this sludgy stuff, but it's, it's nothing bad. It's all sort of just organic matter.
I have to let my dog out. Be right back. This is the problem with doing things at home.
Right.
Otherwise, she's going to bark in my face in a minute.
Uh-huh.
It says, what soap are they using to scour in France? Any idea?
In terms of like soap?
Yeah, it's asking what soap are they using to scour?
Oh, I
Do you know
mean,
if it's a detergent or I don't know
right.
either, actually.
Yeah, it's a detergent. I know that, I've talked a lot with David Ritchie at Green Mountain Spinnery, because they've had to learn over the years, always trying to improve their scouring process there. And they've had some real struggles over the years of trying to extract the lanolin and different soaps, so that they could meet their, because they go into the municipal system down there. And they found actually it was the soap was more clogging up the system there than the lanolin was. They put in a grease trap that could capture a lot of the grease, like 80% of it or something. So it was actually the soap that they were using. So I know he has a a patented process now, so I don't know it. I can't tell you what it is, but I know it meets the organic standards. One of the other places I did visit in France, he was a chemist, and he had it was a little processing facility way up in the mountains, and he was only allowed to wash, I think it was from like May, June, and July, and after that he was only allowed those 3 months. And he would take the wastewater, and it went through a series of pools that he had made that were that had different plants growing in them, and he was using the plants very similar to like what we see at the I don't know if anyone here, if you ever go on the interstate in Vermont heading north, there's a greenhouse at one of the rest stops where it's a big greenhouse that recycles all the wastewater in that site using plants.
It does seem like there should be some biological solution, like a bacteria that would break that down or something.
There was a lot of work on that about a decade ago, maybe it was even longer. John Todd at Woods Hole, he was doing a lot of work on that, and then I don't know, I guess the money kind of dried up for it just when we really need it.
There's another question here. Olivia did her homework. I read your report yesterday, and I was wondering about the interest from the mills in the Northeast and increasing capacity of working with a scouring company in South Carolina or Texas. Do you think there's still interest in doing that?
I know there's talks going on. It's hard to say. I mean, I know that when some of our smaller places like Green Mountain Spinnery or what's the one over there by you, Battenkill? When they do large volumes of scouring, they send it down to South Carolina. It goes down there and then it comes back and then they finish the processing. But it goes through the scouring in South Carolina for chargeurs. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure it's just a huge financial endeavor that's kind of probably beyond anything that, I know there's a group that was working on this in New London. They were based in New London, Connecticut, and they were trying to see if they could repurpose some of the industrial buildings there to set up a scouring facility. I don't know where that's at. I haven't heard anything from them since they first started their research into that. But, a lot of people have tried and failed. And, I'm not really quite sure.
It
It's
needs
for
to be
various,
economically feasible.
yep, it just might not be.
It says, is it possible to use another wool fertilizer presentation other than pellets?
I guess I'm not quite sure what they mean by their question.
Maybe you could just pull it all apart into little puffs,
Yeah.
or maybe there's another, maybe it doesn't actually have to be pelleted.
No, it doesn't. I mean, you can just lay it down in clumps in your garden if you want to, just so it doesn't break down. And I think the pellets are just much easier to handle and incorporate into the soil.
Well, we talked about this morning, we talked about trying to send all our wool out to the pelleting place in the Midwest, and it's just too expensive to send wool because it's pretty bulky.
Yeah.
And heavy.
Yeah.
You're shipping all that dirt and lanolin out there.
Right. And then they get to keep it. And, and actually that's what we want here. We want to keep that organic matter. But yeah, we had done all kinds of financial models of looking at packing it up on 18-wheelers and sending it out there, or sending it by rail, and all of it, it just didn't pan out. It just doesn't pan out.
Too expensive in the end.
Yep.
Somebody asked here, could you not shred the wool and sell it in bags?
Yeah, you could. I mean, I don't see why not. But again,
you still got to shred it.
Yeah, you got to shred it, and it doesn't, as we have all found, it doesn't break down very well. It'll stay in that form for just ages.
That's true. You'd have to, I mean, you might be able to do that on a small scale and with instructions so people know to either rake it up after or dig it in or something. Ed Frederickson mentioned that most feed mills have pellet mills, and I had thought of that too, and I think Kim has also, and you can buy small ones for $1,000. I know we have a small pelleting machine at our extension office that was part of the same sort of project yours was, to make grass pellets for burning in your wood stove. And it works, but it's, like you say, really slow.
Yeah, it was so slow.
You did approach a feed mill, or you looked into that, I think you said.
Yeah, we had conversation with a few of them, and basically what they told us, they weren't very interested at all in sharing their apparatus for part-time for this. They said that they couldn't take the chance of putting, for a mill that's used for making a food product, feed for cattle or livestock, and then using it for processing wool that might have manure in it. No matter how
just
dry.
Run a bag of corn through there to clean it out.
Right.
Feed that to the rats.
So yeah, that we all decided, well, that won't work.
Well, here's a historical question for you. Over the thousands of years people have raised sheep, do you know how they used grease wool, like in the Fertile Crescent? I don't really know.
Yeah, I mean, if you look in old books, you can see, I mean, it was pretty valuable. I mean, look at the story of Jason and the Golden Fleece. It was And it's, it's what the Medici family made their giant fortune on, was wool.
Hmm. I
Um,
think people used to wash the wool, spin it, and make clothes out of it and blankets. That's why
right,
everybody only had one outfit.
right, right. And one blanket and one rug.
One blanket, that's right. But it was a good one and it lasted a long time.
Right, yeah. You had one, that was what you had for your whole life.
It's not like concentrating all the wool in one spot and trying to wash it, which sort of concentrates the problem, or,
Yeah,
the wastewater problem.
yeah.
And somebody else asked, what are the people in Utah using to make their pellets, or is that patented?
I think he did actually recently. He wasn't, when he came out to visit us, he did not have one, but I think in the interim, I think someone told me he has applied for and gotten a patent for his. When he was here, he was just borrowing a pelletizing machine from someone else and using it. Like, he would go 3 times a week to the place where it was, and with wool, and spend all day there, pelletizing and then packaging and then selling it.
Hmm.
Um, so I haven't talked with him since he left, since that, we brought him here. So I'm not quite sure where his whole operation is right now. I know he was very interested in working with us, as he has distributors in the East, but he doesn't want to be shipping it from Utah. It just takes too much. It's just too expensive. And it just makes the price of the pellets too high. So he wants someone to work with him. So we haven't closed the door on that. It's still a possibility, but I think the first step is that we got to see if we can make them here in the Northeast.
Great. Says, thank you. I'm really close to Battenkill Fiber Mill, so it piqued my interest. Any idea how much wool it would take to make a bat of insulation?
I don't know, but I bet if you went, I'm pretty sure that information is on the Havelock Wool website. I think, they have a really nice website, and they tell you their story and the values, the R values of the wool. They show you the different types of insulation they make. So I bet that you would be able to find that on their website.
Here's a comment from Karen. It says, I think people in general are more interested in natural, environmentally friendly things. Do you foresee more interest in insulation for housing? Are there other companies who seem to want to move in that direction? And I feel there's room for much growth there. And I will tell you that I had a designer from New York City call me who's trying to design a whole community made of all natural materials. And she was very interested in where she could get wool insulation, wool to make couch, the upholstery and the padding and the different furniture.
Mm-hmm.
And it was hard to find her a place to send her. And she was trying to source it relatively locally.
I know it is really hard. I did the same thing, and I had a chair that had been my family for a long time that, um, was the upholstery was in bad shape. So I took it to an upholsterer and I cleaned the wool myself. And I brought it all, and she was game. She had gone to England to learn how to do the old-fashioned upholstery work. So she was very excited by it. So we did the project, and it's beautiful. It came out really nice, and she did the whole thing with the wool from my sheep. But yes, it is really hard. And I do get a lot of questions from people about it. And we had a table at one, it was 2 winters ago. We did get a table at a architectural building green conference, and we were just inundated. People were just really, really hungry for this, which was really exciting to see. I think you're right, whoever wrote that comment, that there's definitely a growing interest in having less toxic materials in our homes, and insulation is definitely right high on that list.
We wonder how much they'll be willing to pay for that.
I know that is, I mean, and that's the thing with the Havelock wool. It's expensive.
Let's see. Olivia also says, I'm also wondering about the opportunity for wool for acoustics since wool absorbs sound. And with so many people working from home now, I feel like that could be a niche. That's an interesting idea.
It is. It's very, that's one of the products that I saw when I was in Germany as well. In their offices, they set up their office divider things. They're all made out of wool. They make whole walls. They don't, paint them. They're wool fiber, and it makes it very sound absorbent.
Well, we need those in our classroom. We have like 15 little kids on Zoom, all on a different Zoom when the schools are remote, because we have an after school program and they come to the farm when school's on remote days. That's what we need.
Yeah.
Dorothy's asking, she came in late, so sorry if this has been covered already, but do we know how to protect wall insulation from moths? Wool insulation, of course.
Yeah, one of the things that they do is they, and I'm not quite sure how they do it, whether it's in the wash water, but they use borax, rinse the wool with this borax. I do that too when I wash wool here at my house. It's just the Mule Team washing soda. And you put a little of that in the rinse water or the wash water, and borax, it repels, or I'm not quite sure how it works on them, but that's what keeps the moths out of it.
I forgot about that trick.
Yeah.
That's a good trick to know, even for washing your sweaters and things.
Yeah, it's such a simple little thing, and it works.
Okay, well, I think you've answered a lot of questions.
Well, obviously there's a lot of interest out there, which is great. I think, and I do recommend, we were talking earlier today about resources. So if anybody who has not heard about Stephanie Miles Wilkes, that's her last name, Wilkes, Stephanie Wilkes, she wrote a book called Raw Material. And she's based in California, but I met her at the Hudson Valley Textile Summit a couple of years ago, and she gave a talk. She had just published her book then, and it's, she, again, was a person who likes wool, started knitting, started diving into the question of why is it so hard to find local wool for products? Why aren't we using more of it, et cetera, et cetera. And then she decided to learn how to be a shearer. And that took her even deeper into the whole thing. So she wrote this book about the history of, sheep and the wool industry in this country. And it's just, she did a fantastic job. It's a really good book. So I highly
ordered it this afternoon.
Great.
Can't wait to read it. Here's a fun fact. Somebody mentioned that they use wool for the dampers in pianos.
Oh, yeah.
That rest on the strings, and they also use it in coffins. Hopefully not to dampen the sound, but for protection.
They're making them in Scotland. They're making the coffins out of wool.
So it's natural, and you're not encased in cement.
Right.
That sounds really good. Sonia asked, somebody asked what the name of the book was again. It was Raw Materials. Does it have an S on the end or just Raw Material?
Just Raw Material.
It's by Stephanie Wilkes.
Yep.
If I get a chance, I'll type it in the chat here. And Sonia's asking when the next Zoom on wool or sheep is, etc. And I'm working on that for next month. And I'm trying to get Michelle Stevens, who might actually be on this call, to talk about. She has a business. She does needle felting and some things like that, and markets her wool directly from her farm. And it'd be interesting. This is on a small scale compared to what we're talking about here, but it's an interesting to hear how people have gone about it.
It is. I mean, there's a lot of cottage industries going on, and I just think it's great. They're wonderful.
Yeah, it's a lot of work selling things directly. But if,
Mm-hmm.
if you're passionate about it, it's a lot more fun.
Right.
When I look
But
at the 3 huge wool bags sitting there in the barn, I think, oh my God, I can't even wash all this. It says in Maine, there's somebody with a Zoom series on the history of wool in Maine through the University of Maine. And the University of Maine also has one of the best wool, like, fact sheet pages on their website that I could find around the whole country that described all the different types of wool and what it's used for and shearing. It was a really good practical wool info place.
yeah, they've done a really nice job over the years. And they have less sheep there than we have here in Vermont. But I've always been, an admirer of the work they do. The fiber,
Mm-hmm.
they have this whole fiber trail you can follow to
Oh,
go to different.
interesting.
Yeah, they've just done a fantastic job. Yeah, I applaud them.
There's somebody here who'd be interested in learning more about felting without scouring. Anybody have suggestions of where she could look for that information? I would think it'd be pretty much the same, but it's going to be lumpy because you can't really card the wool to make it, the fibers kind of going in the same direction.
Yeah, from all the research and conversations I've had with processors, it just sounds like you just can't card and felt raw wool. It has to be.
Well, I felted a whole fleece. I just put the whole thing into like a, that was sort of stuck together still in the shape of a fleece.
Oh
And
yeah,
I
yeah.
put it into a like a big trough, and
Mm-hmm.
I just patted it and wiggled my hands on it till it all felted together. But it was fairly thick and lumpy. But
Uh-huh.
you could use that to line a basket. I mean, it isn't pretty, but it wouldn't really matter if that's what you're thinking of doing with it.
Right, right.
It doesn't look smooth and like a piece of felt. It looks like a lumpy fleece that's stuck together.
Right, yeah. But you can't get that sort of uniform felting, like you see in the like those wool clogs. You can't get that uniformity of
Right.
that dense. Yeah.
But you
But
could,
yeah,
if you're making a tree, something to go around the bottom of a tree, for example, that would be perfect. You could just cut a little slit in it and wrap it around the base of the tree.
yeah.
It's kind of fun. We do it with a bunch of kids. We just put it in the thing and let them all put their hands in there. It's kind of like squishing grapes, only they're squishing a fleece instead. We'll probably let them get in there with their feet, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, like instead of doing grapes, you could do
Yeah, put them all in
bump
there
on
and let them
the
stamp on it. Yeah,
wall.
it's actually kind of fun. I don't
Uh-huh.
know, not on an industrial basis, but you could certainly make a few for around your yard or for other people in your neighborhood or something, or at a
Yeah.
small farmer's market level maybe.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Kim. It was great that you would take an hour and share all this. You've obviously done a lot of research and looked into wool from all angles, which it's hard to find that information. So I really appreciate you sharing it with us.
Yeah. Well, I'll be sending out, if you are interested, you can find me on the University of Vermont Center for Sustainable Agriculture. Sorry, I didn't put that on the slide, but if you go there, you'll see that that's another way you can find my report. It's listed in there among other resources. But if you have other questions, I'm certainly happy to answer them. And we do have I call it a mailing list of wool interest, textile interest, and every once in a great while, I'll write a sort of a newsletter update
Mm-hmm.
of what we're doing and how it's going. And I'll definitely be doing that after the trials this summer when we,
Oh,
with the
good.
results of
Vermont has a really good sheep and wool group. I can't think what the name of it is. Sheep and wool. Do you have a name for what is the name of your Vermont sheep and?
Oh, it's a Vermont Sheep and Goat Association.
There you go. I've looked at their website. It's great.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to let people know that in New York State, there is a bunch of extension people getting together with some of our wool enthusiast people like the people from Battenkill, and we're talking about a lot of these same things, what to do with all the wool in New York that's not getting used for something useful. So hopefully we'll come up with at least some educational information or some fact sheets about what the possibilities are, and see if we can get some people working together, which is what it sounds like. Oh, they're asking
Yeah.
for your email, Kim. Is it Kim Hagen, all one?
It's Kimberly. It's Kimberly Hagen.
I'll see if I can type it in here. Kimberly Hagen.
Oh, there's a dot. Kimberly dot
Oh,
Hagen.
let me
Sorry.
try that again. Kimberly dot Hagen
At
at
UVM.edu.
UVM.edu. There you go. I just put it in the chat. I'll leave it there a minute so people can find it. Hopefully you won't be inundated with too many emails, but that's a danger of giving out your email. But
It is, but yeah, it's fine.
great. Well, thanks everybody for getting on tonight. Hope nobody gets snowed in, and y'all have a great rest of the winter and a great Groundhog Day tomorrow.
Yeah, let's hope he doesn't see his shadow, right?
That's right. Although I don't think it's really going to make any difference.
I don't either. We're just, it's another 6 weeks at least, if not 8.
You're getting lots of thank yous here in the chat, just so you know. And for those of you
Okay.
that got on late, this is being recorded, and so I will have the recording. I will try to send it to everybody. It's going to take me a little bit because your emails came in, some of them in my email and some in my registration, but I will try to get that out to everybody in case they want to either watch it again or get the part they missed. So good. Well, good night, everybody. Thanks for coming, and watch for the next Sheep Farm Evolution #3, and we'll see if we can get that planned probably for March, early March sometime.
All right. Well, thank you, Betsy.
Thank you, Kim. Have a great evening.
Yep. Good night.
Good night.